clean it.
I'm gonna start flying again.
Really?
Susan's here, but voting her.
Dexter Rotary.
when she's in.
I'd like to do some rotary and then fix.
Yeah.
I miss it.
An expensive hobby, but it's a cool hobby. Ethan's like, why not?
Okay,
I might
we're
just
ready.
earmark a
Finish
little
that?
bit of money.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking.
Spend that.
It is 5:34, and I'd like to welcome you to the October 1st meeting of the Breckenridge Planning Commission. I'll call it to order. We get a roll call?
Mr. Frechter,
Present.
Mr. Giller,
Yes.
Mr. Lees,
Here.
Ms. Proper,
Here.
Mr. Guerra,
Here.
Fort,
Here.
and then Miss Ambrose is absent.
Commissioners, has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? There any changes to the minutes? I have an issue with the minutes. I really don't recognize any of the comments that were attributed to me. So rather than try to revise them, I'd like you to actually strike the comments.
Okay.
Staff, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes.
As part of the certified local government, we're asked to take public comment on historic preservation issues in our community. With that, I'll open the meeting to any public comment. Doesn't look like we have any. And if you are attending the meeting by phone, you can press *9 to unmute yourself and *6 to unmute yourself. Okay. So we will close that public comment. I don't believe there's, let's see. We don't have anything on the consent calendar. We have, we'll move on to combined hearings of Village at Breckenridge, large vendor cart renewal. 655 South Park Avenue, PL 2024-0363. Staff?
Good evening, Planning Commission. So this evening we do have a renewal for the Euros Delish cart at the Village at Breckenridge Plaza. This was originally approved in 2018, and then it's a 3-year permit. So it was actually renewed in 2021. So they're coming back for their second renewal. There are no changes with this application. Happy to take any questions, comments, or concerns.
Anybody have any? Alan?
I thought we get samples.
I'll talk to Mick.
Elaine, do you have any comments?
No, I don't have any.
No comment.
Okay, Mike?
No, thank you.
And I have no comments. Do you have any comments?
Are you talking to me? No comment.
All right.
You want a motion?
We should, even though I don't believe there's anyone here or online, we should still open up the public comment. Just to follow the procedure.
Do you have anybody out there?
No one online.
Then yes, I will entertain a motion.
All right. I move that we approve the Village of Breckenridge large vendor cart renewal, PL 2024-0363, located at 655 South Park Avenue with a passing point analysis of 0 points, along with the attached findings and conditions of approval.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I can second that.
Thank you, Ethan. You get a vote?
Mr. Lees,
Yes.
Ms. Gort,
Yes.
Mr. Frechter,
Yes.
Mr. Giller,
Yes.
Ms. Proper,
Yes.
Mr. Guerra,
Yes.
That motion passes. We can move on to the work session. Is that yours, Chris?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna pull up a little slide presentation here, so give me 1 second. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm gonna pull up a slide. How would this?
Drag it.
Yeah, thanks.
We have this problem a couple of weeks ago.
It's feeling deja vu.
Like a drive.
Wonder if we can just go down that tab and close it.
Switzerland. We did a week of biking and then 4 days of
Let's go see if we can close out.
hiking. They got a big snowstorm. And then we were way up in the mountains and they had none of the snow removal equipment. And.
No, the
we were
memo
one
doesn't
place we're
let-
supposed to take
I wonder if
the
I
cog
can save
railway
that as a PDF.
to this hotel that's built up there. I can only get there, they built this hotel in the 20s just by transporting all the materials up on the cog railway. And I said, so do you close in the winter? I said, no, we're open all winter. And I said, so why is there snow everywhere? Everyone's slipping. There's I said, because we don't have our snow removal. equipment." You know, they just weren't prepared for
It
it.
was so hot just 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Was that, you said that was near,
We were,
Lucerne?
we were hiking in Lucerne. So have you been there? We were up at Pilatus.
More over towards, Interlochen Burn and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
mountains up there.
Yeah, it was from where we were biking, it was eastern part of Switzerland, so it was too long to get over there for hiking. So that we did around Lucerne. It's just so great for hiking because everything's interconnected, trailheads there.
There's a
can
little
hop on a bus
cafe
or a
over
train.
there.
Oh, yeah, the bird hotels up there. Yeah, there's a bar up there. You order a beer, you get a gallon of beer. I think I'll
Disneyland,
take
I
the
love it.
tram down instead of hiking down.
And the trail signs are all great too, because they talk about minutes to the next.
Yes,
Not
yeah.
mileage or
Yeah.
kilometers, it's
Yeah,
minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, we hiked down 3,500 feet one day. The next, 2 days later, I forget what I was doing and went golfing. I got home and went golfing. And I couldn't, like, the
Knees.
tendons here were
Bending
just like
over.
so sore.
Bending down
Yeah,
to get
yeah,
a ball or
yeah.
going down the stairs.
I forgot to stretch after walking down.
Oh, you're sitting on a plane for 8 hours.
Yeah.
Planning packets.
Wow, that's cool. it kind of quieter season like already or
No, it's pretty busy.
shoulder seasons are still busy? Huh?
What, like 2-3 weeks ago? Or, yeah. Back on we flew home and we landed, after the meeting here started, so it was 2 weeks ago, we landed, we got back and then flew out to Austin 2 days later.
Who's my neighbor?
Here, you know.
I know, well, we had to
Nothing good
go,
here.
I want, yeah.
Family.
Yeah, but he ended up
That's where
coming,
you hurt
we ended up
yourself?
coming, we ended up coming back anyway, because
This is right above.
bonus
Yeah,
was we
right.
got this beautiful, it'll take 3 months to recover.
But I guess it's all wrapped up for.
When she'll be able to start swimming? I don't find out.
So this
I mean,
is,
no, they're gonna take the stitches out
So
next
it's
week,
right
and
there.
she'll just be in a removable brace. So she'll be able to get her arm wet.
I barely see it. It's a big one. That's my solar panel. This is all my property.
All right, well, thanks for bearing with us here that we prepared to view the most underwhelming slideshow to accompany this discussion, but basically we were requested by the town council. I think that the town council really looks to the planning commission as the experts, obviously in the planning code and all things planning, including our long range plans. And I think after they, went through the development agreement process with BGD recently, there was a lot of talk about different code provisions, everything else. They reached out and requested that we do some additional trainings with them to just kind of learn some more of the background and kind of the, 30,000-foot view of both our long range plans as well as the, key points of the development code in the effort to just be more educated on the topic. There's certain members like Stephen and Jay that obviously served on planning commission. They're kind of the mentors for the council. And then Eric obviously was a huge influence when he was there as well. But a lot of them, they're almost they learned a little bit backwards, some of the very specifics, and now they want to know more, just kind of the general framework. So in preparation for, creating a half an hour to 45-minute conversation with them about really comprehensive planning and development code, we just kind of wanted to run our framework by you guys as the experts and see if there's anything that that you maybe want to add, or in some ways looking at like just thinking back through the lens of when you first started out on planning commission, what would you have wanted to know, initially, what would have been helpful? I mean, I think with the complexity of the code, a lot of it's just kind of learning by doing, but we're trying to just really just give them the framework of how, the planning commission really makes decisions, and also how the long range plans shape the community. So with that, we start off with our long range plans, and, which include all the plans listed here, our comp plan, our comprehensive plan, which now is a bit aged. It's 16 years old. It's interesting to think back when Mark, Julie, and I first started. This is one of the first things that we all worked on. Mark particularly was, really spearheaded this effort, in the first 2 years that he was on staff. The Joint Upper Blue Master Plan, which is really in some ways influences the town just as much as the comprehensive plan. That's a plan that originally was adopted in 1997 and has buy-in from both the county and Blue River that, really shaped development within the Upper Blue Basin. And then most recently updated in 2011, although it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. And, it has key provisions. Really, probably the most key is just the TDR program, and also just kind of setting a goal of how much density that lives in the basin. Sustainable Breck Plan, that was another one that was really ambitious, spearheaded by Mayor John Warner. over a couple of years and working through a lot of public process. Mark and I were also very involved in the initial plan, and then kind of turning it over to our sustainability department, in the last probably 8 years, and that was updated in 2022. Open Space and Trails Plan. The Open Space Plan originally adopted in 2007 with a trails component adopted in 2009 and then merged really recently in 2023. But that's really the guiding document for decisions related to programming on open space and even acquisitions. And that one, in some ways, is probably used a little bit more than some of our long-range plans when we're making decisions here, because unlike planning where we have a development code that really says yes or no, open space, there's some interpretation of, you have more flexibility of decision-making. So it's good to have that roadmap. And then our housing department, along with all of our housing studies and everything, we've had our 5-year housing blueprint, which really sets goals for developing workforce housing over the next 5 years. And that was adopted in 2022. But we're in kind of a unique circumstance that our sub-plans, like the sustainability plan, open space, and housing plan, are very current and went through recent public processes, with our overarching documents, both the town comp plan and joint upper blue master plan, being more aged and probably in need of some updating, just because of them both being over a decade old. But those are the plans that really kind of shape when we're looking at making code changes and other things, and new policies. We really should be looking to those documents as kind of our roadmap, if it's responsible or not to make those changes. Along with comprehensive planning, our land use guidelines also provide a framework for decision-making. You can see, I believe we have 42 land use districts throughout town that have a variety of recommendations, everything from very low level density and development in land use district 1, which is kind of that tan that you see throughout the edges of town, to other land use districts that are quite intense, generally adjacent to the ski area, and then ones that are more mid-level density, like you have in the core of town in the historic district. But the land use guidelines make recommendations on everything from density to building height and use. And in a lot of ways, it's our version of zoning, but it ties back to the development code under policy 2, which is land use. So within the development code, you guys know that there are absolute and relative policies. Very simply, absolute policies are policies that must be met. So here's an example of an absolute policy 6 related to building height, that our Zoom screen's blocking out, but it says that building height shall not exceed 26 feet in land use districts 11, 17, and 18, in 18.2 and 19, which is the heart of our conservation district.
Really?
Yeah, that's Wally's house. As mentioned, we also have relative policies, and those are really, the relative policies are kind of split in two. There's some that are very explicitly prescriptive in terms of just give a point assignment for certain situations, like this one, again, under policy 6R, that says that buildings that are more than 1/2 story but less than 1/2 story are assigned -10 points. Very, very cut and dry. There are other ones, as you know, that are open to interpretation. And that's where we lean very heavily on precedent, because, reading through, I apologize for the amount of text on the slide, but this one is policy 7 related to site disturbance, which is one of the ones that I think is most commonly discussed amongst the Planning Commission. It really leaves it open in terms of how the commission views the amount of site disturbance and also the scale of the project and other alternatives to the design can be considered in assigning these points. But again, we look to precedent because we want to be consistent in how we apply these interpretive policies. So usually staff is going to bring at least 2 to 3 examples, sometimes as many as 5 that are the most, closely aligned to a proposal to help, make a recommendation in the amount of points when it is, to be interpreted by the commission. Also, under the development code, we thought we'd take a stab at basically throwing out the policies that we see that shape a project the most, that are really kind of non-negotiable, if you will. There's a lot, we have I think over 50 policies within the code, but when you look at the basics of something that really shapes how big, intense, tall, this and other things, the size of an overall development and the use, it's really these policies. The type of land use, the amount of density that is allowed in the site, how tall a structure can be built. Going back to site and environmental design, looking at really the amount of site disturbance or how it integrates with the natural environment. The placement in structures obviously has a bearing of how far they can develop within the site. Parking in a lot of the smaller lots impacts the design in a big way because there's required parking, and if it cannot be met on site, then essentially the proposal has to be shrunk. And then policy 24, as it relates to the handbook of design standards for the historic and conservation districts is very important because that's a whole other set of framework that we have to review projects within that area through. And speaking of the handbook of design standards, that is the additional design regulations. It's like a whole special development code just for projects within the historic and conservation districts. And as a whole, has sections that are very specific to historic structures that are of significance, as well as new development within the historic district. And finally, development agreements are the magic wand. If there is something that a developer would like to do but is not allowed under the code, it is the avenue to get relief from regulations of the town code. But with a caveat, it must be in exchange for public commitments that can not otherwise be legally obtained under the code. So it's their avenue for horse trading, if you will. And it's really at the complete discretion of town council what, if it's something they even want to entertain or what is enough in terms of public commitment. But particularly on large, complicated projects, like most of the buildings at the base of Peak 7 and 8 in other areas that are sensitive to the town, those are typically where we see the development agreement process undertaken. A variance, that's actually a good question. A variance can only be given, and that's maybe a good one to consider adding in here. But a variance, we can only grant a variance to a policy that is an absolute policy. Relative policies are expected to be made up through positive points if they're achieving a negative point total. But our variance criteria compared to most other jurisdictions is very tight. And it's got to be something that is truly unique to the individual parcel that is being reviewed. And it also cannot be something that is self-inflicted on the part of the applicant. So with those criteria in mind, there's very few, I think the planning commission sees very few variance requests.
Chris, would when Dennis Kuhn's lot was split, would
Mhm.
that have fallen under this?
Yep, that is an example of a development agreement. That would probably be under the, I mean, really, you can get a development agreement of any scale. That'd probably be more of a mid-sized development agreement, if you will, because it's obviously the conservation district is very very important to the town. So, you know, in terms of asking for any kind of relief, there is probably as difficult as any policy under the development code. So that adds to the complexity a little bit. But really, you could have a development, we just had a development agreement at the town council for a project where they wanted to convert, you know, office space to workforce house in exchange for deed restricted workforce housing. No changes to the overall size of the building, but because of the multiplier of density and also being in the historic district, there was actually a density shortage, kind of on paper, even though the square footage wasn't changing. And then there wasn't the opportunity without a development agreement to transfer more density in for that type of use. But the council weighed the benefit of having a deed restricted workforce housing unit within the core of town against basically going against some of the policies within the historic district, and found that there's minimal impact because it wasn't changing the character of the building or the size in any way, but still nevertheless needed the development agreement process to open up that possibility. So that would be definitely on the smaller end of the development agreement. And then I think the one that we just went through with BGV, where we have 7 different parcels and hundreds of thousands of square feet and a lot of switching around, that would probably be the largest, most complicated development agreement in the town's history.
So one more question. Do applicants ask for variances very often? I've not seen many.
It's pretty seldom. It's either, there's really 2 situations where the commission would see a variance. It's either one where it is truly unique and it is something that they can't avoid.
Okay.
And then the staff supports it and recommends to the applicant that they pursue a variance. Or it's something that after all the initial discussions, the applicant still is unhappy that staff is not recommending a variance, and they say, we're going to take our shot with the planning commission. Historically, those have not turned out well for the applicant, but
Say that at least half the variances that we've seen in the last few years had to do with Cucumber Gulch. And there's a preventative management area there. And, you know, you can't do anything within that area. There's very strict limitations. And so it'd be for things like modifications to a stormwater detention pond that's already there, things like that we've authorized them for. But Chris is right. I mean, criteria is pretty strict. And in fact, it is in a lot of jurisdictions it's strict, but a lot of jurisdictions are also, they kind of use a lot of discretion in terms of reviewing those. We don't tend to do that as much.
Is there much private property in the Gulch?
There's some, yeah, on the edges.
And that would be the occasion where somebody might ask for a variance.
Yeah, we've had a few there.
yeah, there's even the occasion where I think there's some water quality features that predate when we acquired the land or the land was dedicated to us, but still have that right through an easement. And then so when they either have to modify those or they're expanding those for other development that was contemplated at the time, then they have to go through the variance. And in some ways, those are straightforward because we have precedent and we have the procedure for it. Even though it sounds more complicated, this ends up being extra pages of conditions and other things that have to meet relative to monitoring, but we do have a pretty consistent path forward.
In that instance, are those requests for variances usually to allow the applicant to discharge into the gulch?
Yeah, it's,
Water?
it's usually where there's no availability of detention on site.
Right.
And then there's this existing facility that was
There's no
constructed for the
stormwater
purpose of
management
that.
Plan.
And that's why we give them, we entertain the variance. And I think part of it was initially the construction was probably negotiated through a development agreement. If we look back all the way, but then it's additional, water that's the come through there and discharge. But it comes with a lot of strings attached typically for those specific, variances.
Chris, are there any more slides or? is
There,
this-
there isn't. There's actually
Okay.
very good timing in
I've-
terms of the
yeah,
questions. And
I just
and-
want, go ahead.
and as I say, obviously you guys understand most of this, so I went through some of the stuff quicker than we probably would, and we may pause on some of the slides or the topics with the council so they can maybe discuss it at the time. Not trying to tell you a lot of things that you already know. I kind of went through it kind of fast, but really happy to engage in dialogue and suggestions. And it sounds like Mark has a couple.
Well, I just had a couple of things, just to highlight a couple of things Chris brought up early on the plans. The comprehensive plan, so that's state statutes require that we have one. And we'll actually be going through an amendment to the comp plan next year. There's new laws that were put in place that require a water supply element be added, water conservation, that type of thing, and a few other things as well. So we'll be going through a process and we'll be bringing that to you to review next year. I think we have to have it completed by the end of next year, 2025, to be compliant with state law. And then the Join Upper Blue Master Plan, it's been a number of years, but I'll tell you, opening that up is a little more difficult because you have to have all three jurisdictions, Summit County, Town of Breckenridge, and Town of Blue River, all on board with doing that. And you form a committee that's made up of all three jurisdictions and you go through this process. So there has to be a pretty compelling reason to, open that up. Honestly, the policies there are still pretty pertinent. It's an older document for sure now, 2011. I can remember when we worked on updating it. And, that's one of the reasons that we probably aren't going to update that on a super regular basis either, is just because getting all three parties together, we actually have to bring, when we adopt it, we have to bring the town council, the board of county commissioners, and the board of trustees from Blue River all into one room and act at the same time. So, yeah, there's just a lot of logistics there.
So, you spoke to updating the town comprehensive plan next year, but, what are, in these next updates, what do you see happening, or where are we headed, or what are problems you're seeing now that need to be planned for?
Well, I think, one of them, and we've been having these discussions even between you and the council, is redevelopment.
Mhm.
And that's probably one I think that needs to be discussed more
Great.
in that planning process. Exactly. Scrapes. Yeah, new, whether it's on commercial or on smaller properties, but, so that's one for sure. And then of course, these things that are being mandated by the state. But it's time to take a long look at that plan, being 16 years old now. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's
That too. I was looking through it today and it talks about transportation in there. And I don't know if we have a separate transportation plan now, but maybe that's something we want to look more at with all the backup in town. And
Yeah.
I know you have people working on the issue.
Yeah, I mean, transportation is, I guess, it's covered in the chapter in the sustainability plan, but it also periodically, I'd say every 3 to 5 years, Public Works usually does a transportation study relative to public transit. But the sustainability plan in terms of having goals, looking at benchmarks of traffic, congestion, alternative transportation, that's kind of where that's located within that chapter of the sustainability plan.
Okay. So I guess I had a couple comments, just suggestions, because you said you guys were looking for suggestions. So I think this is excellent. My suggestion is for when you present it to have links to all these plans when you send it out, because I had to look for all of them, spent a lot of time looking. And that leads to my next suggestion is be nice to put this summary on your guys' website somewhere or make these really user-friendly to find.
Probably take the exact summary out in front of the plan, just post it up front on the town website.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
sure you have
that's similar to what I
website
did, and a lot of the wording for even the descriptions is either part of the executive summary or kind of wordsmith to shorten it down.
Yeah, I just think they'd really appreciate that. I know I would have. Yeah, that was all my suggestions.
I just had a suggestion. I noticed whenever have in the past reviewed, a full-on project in the historical district, Stephen Gerard had printed out the design handbook and he had it in a notebook. And even though, when I do the prep, I look at it online, sometimes things come up and it'd be nice to see that. I just was thinking, maybe if you just print it up and bound a bunch of printed copies that you handed out to us to have during the meeting. And you can also give that to the town council when they have to, if they call up one of our projects or have something that involves the historic district, they could just have that on hand to flip through it.
Yes, look, along that, I think personally, or for the patent office, so we put in URL links for those to
Mhm.
certain codes and things like that. I don't know if you could do that in our,
On the staff report, put the URL.
yeah, like you guys have the code. It'd be really nice if I could just click on it and not have to look through the whole code. I know it takes a little time, but it really makes it efficient because you can see in the context of where it is in the code.
They're doing something like that.
Yeah, because your staff reports are excellent because they bring up all the relevant policies from the design handbook. But just seeing the pictures and everything in there is really helpful.
Okay, I think we can definitely work on that.
It'd probably be even more helpful for our town council.
Yeah, I think, depending on the reaction to this or, we're excited honestly that the town councils that interested were like, hey, we want you guys to come and just talk about your process a little bit more and better understand it. And also wanted feedback from the planning commission, relative to that. I think that shows that they're being proactive and really wanting to understand really one of the cornerstones of our town government.
I think when
And-
you have somebody like Manuel though, who had been on planning commission for a long time, had all this knowledge in his head, it leaves a vacuum. And I think they're responding to that vacuum now and trying to fill that knowledge base now that he's out of it, because he could speak for all of that and they didn't need to.
And actually, like, probably up to 15 or maybe 20, I guess it's probably 15 years ago, they used to do 1-year stints on planning commission. And which was beneficial that by the time that, they cycled through, they all had experience of sitting behind here and looking at applications, and it really helped further the knowledge. But then ultimately, under the advisement of our town attorney, it created an issue if they did call it up, because then that individual would have to recuse themselves, and then you'd only have 6 members left, and it could create a split vote situation. And that's why they ultimately stopped doing it. But there was that time period where everyone did have at least a year experience as they were on the council.
Yeah,
And then the
Jeffrey loved his year on the commission.
Is that entertaining?
The handbook of design standards, if they decide to go further than this, we'd probably would do a session just on that. It's the difficulty of paring it down enough that you can have a half an hour to 40-minute meaningful discussion about certain things and have some understanding, but not get overwhelmed, because obviously the Handbook of Design Standards, you could do a very lengthy presentation and really get into the specifics.
And I might add, under the Handbook of Design Standards, that tiers right off the National Park Service Secretary of Interior standards. And then they have, on the Park Service website, preservation briefs, and there are about 50 of them, and they speak to different building components, and they're really great summaries on sort of the parts and pieces of historic preservation.
Any other thoughts on things you wish you knew when you, or early on in your career here that would be helpful for us to share with the council?
I think Alan's comment was very instrumental, and you probably ought to think about doing the printout. I know I had to ask for that information, and it took me a while to understand what I needed to ask for. But I have a binder in my briefcase that has all the things that Alan was relating to, and it's very helpful when you're sitting down and you're going through something that's coming up, to be able to just go to the page as opposed to looking it up on your computer, getting the computer out and all that. It's helpful. So I think that would probably be a good thing for you to think about doing whenever anybody new comes on.
Just have a copy here all the time. I feel like it's so big, you can't look through it.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You, Chris.
Any other matters?
Well, I can give you the council.
Okay.
And then I've got a few other things just to go over with you.
Okay, we'd like to hear it.
So,
At the council meeting, they appointed the new town attorney, Keely Ambrose. So she did. I couldn't really let the cat out of the bag 2 weeks ago. I told you she was a finalist. Well, yeah, she was on her way at that point to getting selected. So, yeah, obviously because of that, we'll be recruiting a new planning commissioner. And we also have 2 seats that Ethan and Elaine, your terms are up. You're eligible for re-upping. And we've already put the notice in the paper because we're going to need to appoint 3 people here at the end of the month. So that's scheduled for a council meeting on October 22nd. And so, yeah, anyway, if you are interested in re-upping, please submit the application that says in the paper and online, and then we'll see all the applicants we get, and we'll have finally have a couple interviews with the council, but they want us to narrow the list down a little bit. So anyway, yeah. So that was all related to that. In addition to that, Julia talked with the council about employee generation. And there's going to be a code change for housing mitigation. So requiring employees to be provided with new housing, with new developments, some housing to be provided. And right now, our calculation is based on 35% of the actual employees that are generated. That 35% have to be provided. And the question was, should that be a different percentage? And after a long discussion, the council, because Aspen has up to 60% mitigation rate, they settled on 35%, which actually staff is pretty happy about. it's just, it's gonna make life easier for us because that's what we're already doing. So. Anyway, other than that, that was the main thing. We're gonna talk at a future meeting about, do we want to exempt some small businesses from that requirement altogether? Like 1,000 square feet or smaller, when it's just a change of use, for example? Would we still implement this requirement that they have to provide housing? And so that's going to be discussed, as well as something that you guys have been involved with, and that's the challenge procedures for those numbers. So if you remember a couple of years ago, Highside Brewery came in and they said, hey, we're not a full restaurant. We're going to have probably two employees at most on staff at any one time. So do we have to provide 10 employees, which the formula would have required? And so anyway, that's another thing that's going to be discussed. But the thought is, now that we're adopting some new numbers based on a more robust study by EPS that was done, we're probably going to ratchet that down a little bit so those challenges can't be so easy to do. But anyway, I think there'll still be a path if someone wants to make a challenge on that. So those are a couple of the main issues that remain to be discussed. There's also, the council brought up the thought of, right now, if your new business or your change of use is going to create a demand for one employee or less, you can pay a fee in lieu. If it's more than that, you have to provide the housing yourself. And there was a suggestion by council of perhaps we can take a fee in lieu for any amount, and that the town is probably in as good a position as anyone to make new housing happen with that money, because it would just go into the housing fund and go into, producing more units. So anyway, that's the kind of the direction we're going on this, but those decisions haven't been finalized by council yet. So that'll be at an upcoming meeting that we have those discussions. And let's see. Yeah, that was mainly it from the meeting. Any other questions? No. Then the only other thing I had was we've got this field trip scheduled to Denver to look at workforce housing on October 17th. Mark, I know you can't make it, and Susan, I know you can't make it. Right now I've got Alan, Elaine, and Ethan as a yes. And Mike, baby. Yeah, do you know when you can find out? Because we're just trying to.
I'll talk to you.
Yeah, we want to finalize it pretty quick, just in terms of, but I think, yeah, we'd love to get you to go if you can. So anyway, that's it.
Just take a picture of it.
Yep.
Okay. With that, I will adjourn the meeting at 6:25.
That we're doing this trip to look at employee housing.